The daily grind was a small theater of repetition, and Maya was its sole, silent director. At 5:47 a.m., before the first bleary-eyed commuter pushed through the door, she had already catalogued the inventory, the hiss of the espresso machine, and the precise angle of the morning sun slicing through the dusty blinds. By 6:15, the rush began, a familiar tide of predictable faces and predictable orders. The man with the frayed briefcase always wanted a double-shot macchiato, no foam. The woman in the yoga pants asked for a venti green tea, 2 bags, water just off the boil. Maya's hands moved with a practiced, fluid grace, her mind a perfect, silent ledger. She didn't just remember the orders, she remembered the tremor in a hand, the new scratch on a watch, the tiredness in a pair of eyes that hadn't been there yesterday. It was a gift, some might say a curse, that she never asked for. The world was simply a vast, intricate tapestry of details, and she saw every single thread. By 10 o'clock, the cacophony had subsided to a gentle murmur. Maya wiped down the counter, her gaze sweeping the room. It stopped on the corkboard by the door, a cluttered mosaic of apartment listings and guitar lessons. A faded, sun-bleached flyer was tacked to the corner, its edges curled and yellowed. The face on it was a ghost, frozen in time by a grainy photograph from 3 decades ago. A young woman, maybe 19, with a hopeful smile and a cascade of dark hair. The headline read, "Emily Carter, missing since 1994. Maya had seen the flyer 1,000 times. It was as much a part of the café's decor as the chipped mugs and the old cash register. But today, a new detail snagged at her attention. In the background of the photo, she noticed a sliver of a sign, too out of focus to read, but its shape was distinct. She saw that same shape now, out the window, on the roof of the hardware store across the street. The angle of the light in the photograph matched the angle of the sun at 2:17 p.m. on a late October day. It was a detail no one else would ever see. She also noticed something else. A new, smaller flyer had been pinned beside the old one, a recent addition. It was a generic notice, but it was printed on the same cheap, off-white paper she knew the police department had used for decades. She saw the faint, ghostly imprint of a previous document on the paper, the faint, ghostly imprint of a 1994 case number. Maya's breath caught in her throat. The coincidence was too precise. The numbers, the light, the shape. It was a pattern, and patterns were her language. She looked from the old flyer to the new one, and back again. The world's tapestry had just revealed a single, loose thread, and for the first time in her life, Maya was tempted to pull. The bell above the door chimed, but Detective Frank Danvers didn't hear it. He was staring at the faded flyer taped to the window of the Daily Grind, the one the barista had been scrutinizing. Emily Carter. A ghost from 30 years ago. Her face, frozen at 19, looked back at him with the same silent accusation it always had. "You see that?" his partner, Detective Alicia Reyes, asked, nodding toward the flyer. She slid into the booth across from him, unimpressed. "Someone's been putting those up all over the West Side. A new tip came into the hotline this morning. Anonymous. Said they saw her car near the quarry. Probably a college kid who just watched a documentary." Danvers grunted, pushing his untouched coffee away. The quarry was dredged in '96. Then again in '04. Nothing. The car was found abandoned 6 miles from there with her purse still in the front seat. "We did our job, Reyes. We did it right." His voice carried the weight of a man who had repeated that sentence to himself more times than to anyone else. He was a different person then, young, hungry, convinced he could solve anything. The Emily Carter case had taught him otherwise. It had taught him that the world didn't always yield to good police work. "I'm not saying you didn't," Reyes said, her tone gentler now. "But the captain wants fresh eyes. The public's been circling this thing again. The anniversary is next month. Fresh eyes. Danvers scoffed. You know what fresh eyes see? A dead end. We interviewed every friend, every professor, every boy she ever looked at. She went to get coffee, and she never came home. There were no signs of a struggle. No witnesses. No motive. You can't solve a puzzle with missing pieces. Across the room, the barista, the one with the sharp, unsettling gaze, was wiping down the counter. She moved with a quiet efficiency that Danvers found vaguely irritating. She was young, barely older than Emily had been. He wondered what she thought she saw in that flyer. A tragedy? A mystery to be solved over a latte? Reyes followed his gaze. She was staring at it for a long time before you got here. Like she was memorizing it. People stare at things, Danvers muttered. It doesn't mean they see them. He pushed back from the table, the old scar tissue of his pride aching. We need to get back. The captain wants a briefing on the new tip. I'll tell him the same thing I've told every captain for 3 decades, there's nothing new to find. The original investigation was thorough. The case is cold, and it's going to stay that way. He stood, leaving the coffee untouched. As he walked toward the door, he passed the barista. She looked up, and for a moment, their eyes met. Her gaze was not vacant, not curious. It was knowing. It was the look of someone who had already seen the answer and was simply waiting for the rest of the world to catch up. Danvers looked away first. He told himself it was because he had a department to answer to, a reputation to defend. But as the door swung shut behind him, the image of her face lingered, odd and unwelcome, like a note he couldn't quite read. His voice was still hanging in the air, a low grumble about cold cases and wasted manpower, when Maya slid the photograph across the counter. It was one of the originals, a grainy shot of Emily Carter's car, parked at the edge of a lot, the driver's side door ajar. She didn't say anything. She just tapped a spot in the background, a blur of motion behind a chain-link fence. The younger detective, whose name she'd caught as Reed, leaned in. What am I looking at? You're looking at a person, Maya said. Or the shape of one, anyway. The light catches the sleeve of a jacket, and the angle of the shadow suggests they were moving fast, probably away from the camera. She paused. But that's not why I'm showing you. I'm showing you because I've seen that same shape before. In another photo, taken 11 minutes earlier, by a different camera, at a gas station 2 miles away. Reed blinked. You memorized a blur in a 30-year-old photo? Maya didn't flinch. She thought of the library, the hours she'd spent as a teenager hunched over microfiche machines, the glow of the screen bleaching the color out of her face. She'd taught herself to read the world backward, to see the trail before the person. Podcasts played in her ears while she wiped down the espresso machine, voices narrating timelines and alibis, and she'd learned that people were terrible at hiding themselves. They left fingerprints of habit everywhere, the way they lingered at a crosswalk, the tilt of their head when they lied, the specific rhythm of their stride. I don't forget faces, she said, and her voice was quieter now, almost reverent. I don't forget the way people move. I used to think it was a curse, walking through a crowd felt like drowning in information. Every stranger was a story I couldn't stop reading. But then I realized something, people think they vanish when they leave a room. They don't. They leave a smear of choices behind them. The coffee cup they set down at a slight angle. The door they held open for someone they didn't know. The exact spot where they stood to tie their shoe. She looked up at Danvers, who had gone very still. I started with the timeline, Maya continued. The official report says Emily left work at 4:12 p.m. But the weather records from that day show it rained at 4:47, and the tread marks near the car, the ones the original team photographed but never analyzed, they're crisp, unwashed. So she wasn't there when it rained. She was there after. Someone moved the car. Danvers's jaw tightened. That's guesswork. No, Maya said, and her voice was gentle, almost kind. It's noticing. You trained yourself to look for evidence. I trained myself to look for the absence of it. The spaces between the facts are where people hide. The library's fluorescent lights hummed a low, monotonous drone, a sound that had become the soundtrack to Maya's obsession. She had commandeered a corner table, its surface now a chaotic collage of yellowed newspaper clippings, a spiral notebook, and a single, stained napkin. The napkin, a coffee-ringed relic from her own shop, was the canvas for her reconstruction. She drew a line, her pen scratching the paper. That's the timeline, she whispered to herself. The clippings were the public record, the sanitized version of the story. But her mind, that relentless archive, was filling in the gaps. She saw not just the headlines, but the faces in the background of each photograph. The crowd outside the hardware store, the neighbors on their porches, the delivery man frozen mid-step. She traced a path on the napkin with her finger. The victim's last known movements: 5:12 p.m., leaving the bank. 5:20 p.m., stopping at the corner newsstand. 5:47 p.m., entering the alley behind her apartment building. The timeline ended there. But in her mind's eye, she saw the photos from the Herald, taken a day later. There was a truck in the background of one, a generic white panel van with a faded logo. The police report, unearthed from the microfiche, mentioned witness statements from residents, a dog walker, a kid on a bike. No one mentioned a truck. Why would they? It was just a delivery. It was nothing. But Maya was seeing something else. She pulled the clipping closer, her eyes scanning the grainy image. The truck was parked at the mouth of the alley, partially obscured by a fire hydrant. The driver's side door was open. Her photographic memory flickered, pulling up another image, a still from a traffic camera she'd seen on the county website. The date stamp was the same week. She grabbed a fresh sheet of paper, sketching the truck's logo from memory. It was a generic delivery service, the kind that subcontracted for local pharmacies. She knew the name. It was a small detail, a detail lost in a mountain of paperwork. The library's internet terminal was slow, but it was a portal. She typed in the trucking company's name, then the name of the driver she'd seen in the traffic stop database. It was a minor infraction, an expired tag. But the driver's name was there, plain as day. She wrote it down, the name feeling heavy on the page. She then cross-referenced the driver's name with the archived traffic stop report. The stop was on the same street, at 5:55 p.m. 5 minutes after the victim's last known moment. She leaned back, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. The truck was there, at the alley, for a delivery that was never logged. The driver was on the same street, at the same time, committing a minor traffic violation that put him in the police system. He was a ghost in the machine, a data point missed because no one was looking for him. She looked at the napkin. The timeline was complete. A simple, unremarkable line from bank to corner to alley. But now there was a new line, a perpendicular one, drawn in her mind. The truck's path, intersecting the victim's path at the exact moment of the crime. The lead detective, Danvers, had spent 30 years looking for a monster. A stranger, a shadow, a faceless villain. He had never once considered the mundane. The delivery man. The man in a uniform who was supposed to be there, who was invisible because he was part of the scenery. Maya carefully folded the napkin, the paper soft and worn from her handling. She gathered the clippings, the notebook, the sketch. She had done it. She had reconstructed the crime, not with forensic tools or interrogations, but with the debris of everyday life. The photograph no one analyzed. The traffic stop no one connected. The name no one knew. She stood, shoving the evidence into her bag. The library lights flickered as if to signal closing time, but she didn't need more time. The truth was in her hands, sketched on a napkin. It was time to show it to someone who would finally see. The napkin was a crumpled artifact, a map of a life drawn in coffee-ringed ink. Danvers' partner, whose name was Officer Liam Reed, held it with the reverence one might afford a sacred text. He'd read it 3 times, tracing the line between a 30-year-old photograph of a delivery truck and a minor traffic citation. The logic was a sliver of glass, impossibly sharp and painfully clear. He found Captain Moreau in her office, a fortress of mahogany and framed commendations. She looked up, her eyes tired, as he laid the napkin on her desk. "Sir," he said, his voice stripped of its usual bravado. "You need to see this." Moreau's eyes scanned the scrawled timeline, the names, the crucial notation, truck seen at 2:47 p.m., not interviewed. She looked from the napkin to Reed, a question forming in the lines of her face. "This is the barista's work?" "Yes, sir," Reed said. "And I think she's right." The call to forensics was a formality, a last-ditch effort to either confirm a miracle or bury a humiliation. The preserved evidence item, a single, stained work glove found near the dump site, had been catalogued and forgotten for 3 decades. The forensic analyst, a young man named Dr. Alastair Finch, had been given the glove and the name. The name of the truck driver, a man who had died of a heart attack 5 years prior. The world held its breath in the hum of the fluorescent lights. The result came back within hours, a cold, unemotional data point. The trace DNA on the glove was a match. A perfect, irrefutable match to the deceased truck driver. The silence in the captain's office was absolute. It was the silence of a foundation cracking, of a story rewritten in a single, brutal stroke. Danvers, summoned to the office, stood as if turned to stone. His jaw was tight, his eyes fixed on a point on the far wall, refusing to meet the truth on the desk. The case he had carried, the one he had defined his career by, was not just cold, it was wrong. He was never interviewed, Reed whispered, the words carrying the weight of an accusation. He was right there, in the background of half the photos. Moreau's face was unreadable, a mask of institutional control, but her hands trembled as she picked up the phone to request the security footage from the daily grind. They needed to see it, needed to understand. The video was grainy, time-stamped from that morning. It showed Maya, the barista, moving with quiet focus. The camera captured her at the counter, her eyes not on the espresso machine, but on a stack of old newspapers. It showed her sketching on a napkin, her finger tracing a path across a printed map. It showed her pausing, her head tilting, as she stared at a grainy photo of a street corner. The entire process was laid bare, a testament to pure, unadulterated observation. She had not guessed. She had seen. When the footage ended, the room was plunged back into a silence that felt alive, thrumming with the shock of the impossible made real. Danvers finally spoke, his voice a dry rasp. "She's just a barista." "No," Moreau said, her voice quiet but firm. "She's just the person who solved your case." She looked at Reed, her gaze sharp. "Bring her in. I want to hear her explain it." The silence in the captain's office was a physical thing, heavy with the weight of 30 years. The DNA report lay on the desk like a verdict, and the security footage on the monitor had frozen on Maya's face, mid-thought, her eyes holding a pattern only she could see. Danvers stood rigid, his jaw a knot of granite, while his partner leaned against the wall, arms crossed, his earlier skepticism now a quiet, focused attention. Captain Reyes broke the stillness. "Explain it to me, Ms. Vance. From the beginning." Not the what. The how. Her voice was level, but her gaze was sharp, probing the young woman before her. Maya took a breath. She didn't fidget, didn't look away. She looked at Danvers first, and there was no triumph in her eyes, only a quiet, earnest humility. It wasn't a flash of genius, Captain. It was just, seeing what was already there. She gestured to the napkin on the desk, now sealed in an evidence bag. The original report mentioned a witness who saw a truck idling near the alley. But it was written off because the witness was elderly and the description was vague. Everyone focused on the sedan that was parked there for an hour. She turned to Danvers. I read the report. The sedan had a parking ticket. The driver was a woman with a child's car seat. She was there for an hour, but she was waiting for a friend. The report disproved her, but it took 3 pages to do it. She paused. The truck was mentioned in one sentence. Unable to obtain plate, vehicle left area at 2:15 p.m. But the timeline of the victim's death was placed at 2 p.m. A truck idling for 15 minutes. In the cold. Why idle for 15 minutes? Danvers' eyes narrowed. To warm the engine. In September? Maya asked gently. The trucking logs from that week showed a fuel discrepancy at the depot. A driver named Raymond Holt had signed out for a full tank but only traveled 40 miles. The logs were misfiled, but they were there. I just remembered them. The forensic analyst spoke up. The DNA from the fabric under the victim's fingernail was a partial match, but it degraded. It wasn't in the system. It took a familial search to link it to Raymond Holt's son, who was arrested for assault last year. The son's DNA was a direct match to the sample. We exhumed Holt's remains. It's him. Danvers' shoulders slumped, the fight draining out of him. I had him in the interrogation room. He was nervous. I thought he was just a nervous trucker. I let him go. His voice was raw, stripped of its institutional pride. Captain Reyes looked from Danvers to Maya. You did in one shift what a task force couldn't do in 30 years. Maya shook her head. I didn't have to be right. I had nothing to lose. I could afford to follow the boring details. She looked at Danvers, and her voice was soft. You had a reputation to protect. A case you thought was closed. It's easier to defend the past than to question it. Reyes leaned forward. I want you on a retainer. Civilian consultant. You see what my people are trained to overlook. Maya blinked, surprised. I'm a barista, Captain. You're a pattern finder, Reyes countered. And right now, that's worth more than a badge. The offer hung in the air, not as a command, but as a question. A door cracked open. Maya looked at her hands, calloused from steaming milk and wiping counters, then back at the captain. I'll think about it, she said, and meant it. The station buzzed around them, phones ringing, keyboards clacking, but for a moment, the world felt still. Danvers cleared his throat. You saw what I couldn't, he said, the admission costing him more than any reprimand. Maya smiled, not triumphantly, but kindly. You saw what you expected to see. I saw what was there. Later, walking out into the fading sunlight, she passed a janitor mopping the lobby floor. He glanced up, nodded, and she nodded back. Then she paused. His badge, half hidden under his collar, read Hernandez. He'd worked there for decades. She wondered what he'd seen in all those years of quiet scrubbing. What patterns lived in his memory, unasked and unheard. The station would be cleaned, and someone would walk past him, and never think to look closer. But she would. And now, maybe, so would you.